I think this panel is going to be a very interesting panel. We have two experts from the United States, Marcus Noland, and from China, Yu Yondin, and myself. I'll be participating in the panel. I am from Japan, so it's sort of a good mix. First, let me briefly introduce two other panelists. Marcus Noland is currently Deputy Director and Senior Fellow of the Peterson Institute for International Economics in Washington, D.C., one of the most prominent and active think tanks in the United States. Marcus Noland got a PhD from Johns Hopkins University when I was teaching there. So I knew him when he was a student. And he also knew me when I was a very young, immature assistant professor.
We both had more hair.
Okay, don't be too personal. And Dr. Yondin, Yu Yondin, was a professor. I don't know if you still maintain that title.
Yes.
But okay. He's a professor of the Institute of World Economics and Politics at the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences. He was actually a director of the Institute of World Politics and World Economics and Politics. And the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences is one of the most prestigious think tanks in China. Dr. Yu obtained his PhD from Oxford University in economics. So he's a very rare commodity in China, having gotten a PhD from the UK in his age cohort.
Okay.
We have these two gentlemen from the US and China. So what we are going to do is for each of us to make a brief presentation, and then we are going to discuss among ourselves until about 11 o'clock or so. So let me first sort of introduce the overall issue of this global balance issue. Okay. Just before my presentation, I get into my presentation. Just I would like to give you a bit bigger picture. Of course, the global imbalance issue has been discussed for some years, even before the global financial crisis. And the issue was how to resolve the US large current account deficit and China's large current account surplus. That was really the focus before the global financial crisis. And then after the global financial crisis, the issue somewhat changed to the issue of how China and other Asian countries can expand demand so that the crisis affected the United States and Europe can continue to grow. So what should China and other Asian countries do? So there has been some shift in the focus of the global imbalance issue. Before the global financial crisis, the argument was that unless the global imbalance were resolved, a crisis would come in the form of loss of confidence in the US dollar and the US economic hard landing, and hence global economic recession or crisis. Of course, what happened was not exactly like that, but there was a crisis that was originated in the United States and then spread to the rest of the world. But again, the global imbalance issue came back. And the G20 process continues to focus on this as one of the most important issues, as Dr. Kim and Assemblyman Park mentioned earlier. But now, a bigger picture is that there is a great global transformation in the sense that China, India, and other emerging Asian economies are growing in a rapid way, and emerging Asia is going to be the largest economic zone in the global economy, whereas the United States and Europe would still continue to grow, but at a much slower pace, so that their relative scale in the global economy is going to shrink. So the issue for Asia is that Asia cannot continue to grow by depending on the shrinking US and European markets. So that's one very important point that I want to make. Second important point I want to make is another kind of imbalance. The Asian economies, emerging and developing Asian economies have been growing, but at the expense of the environment and social harmony. So environmental degradation is a big issue, and social disparity, a widening social gap, is another important issue. So this economic growth versus the environment and also climate change issue and social. So this imbalance is something that Asia may need to address. The third imbalance, a big picture imbalance, is the issue of who is going to provide global public goods. The United States and Europe, relatively shrinking, may not be able to continue to provide global public goods, like open trading system, support for global financial stability, climate change mitigation, and development aid. All these issues are there. Now, can a rising Asia fill the gap? So that's a big issue. It seems to me that China, India, and ASEAN may not be quite ready to fully replace the role that has been played by the United States and Europe. So these are some big picture imbalances in the global economy. So from this perspective, I think we want to start our discussion, and I think I am assigned as the first presenter. each person is going to spend 10 minutes, but in my case, I have already spent maybe close to 10 minutes. So I'd be very, very quick. So what I'm going to do is to use this PowerPoint. And by the way, my presentation is in the program. So you may also want to take a look at this. This is the global imbalance issue, in particular the imbalance on the part of the United States and other economies. You can realize that for many years the United States has been the largest deficit country, and its deficit is projected to decline by the IMF. This is the IMF data. Now, China is emerging as a big surplus country. Japan used to be the biggest surplus country, but Japan's surplus, current account surplus, has been shrinking, relatively speaking, and China's current account surplus is rising. And the IMF predicts China's current account to become bigger, whereas the US current account to become smaller. Now, actually, the global financial crisis caused the US current account to shrink, and China's current account deficit to shrink, and China's current account surplus to shrink. But after global recovery begins, after this European crisis goes, it's not very clear what's going to happen to the U.S. and Chinese Chinese imbalances. In my view, the focus, the global discussions of the global imbalance was somewhat misled because there was too much focus on the U.S.-China imbalance. And in particular, the global community was focusing very much on China's excessive current account surpluses. I also take the view that China's current account surplus was very large and may continue to be large, and China's current account surplus needs to be shrunken. But this excessive focus may have diverted the global attention away from the U.S. domestic financial fragility before 2008. So everybody missed the U.S. problem. That was the cause of the global financial crisis. The second mistake was that very little attention was paid to the intra-Eurozone imbalance. Okay? People were talking about the German surplus, but German surplus was considered to be bad because American deficit was a counterpart, rather than the German surplus versus Southern European deficit. So again, here the global community missed. Then the Eurozone crisis came. So there were two big mistakes. Okay. Having said that, so I talk about, but Asia's growth rebalancing is really needed because even though in Asia intra-regional trade is expanding, a lot of intra-regional trade is parts and components trade rather than finished product trade. So the statistics before the Asian financial crisis told us that Asia's trade, a lot of Asia trade was done among Asian countries, but some Asian countries utilized parts and components to be imported for the purpose of exporting. Maybe China is a good example. So about 2/3 of Asia's trade really ended up with markets outside of Asia, the US and Europe. So Asia needs to change this trade pattern, namely that Asians have to trade for Asia's consumption, for Asia's investment. So rather than continuing to depend on American and European markets. Okay? And for this purpose, a big challenge for Asian countries is to support the rising middle income class in Asia, which is growing very fast. So middle income class is going to be a big source of consumption. And also investment is needed, in particular in those countries that were affected by the Asian financial crisis of 1997-98. Many ASEAN countries experienced very low investment rate relative to savings rate. So investment would have to be stimulated in those countries, in many ASEAN countries and countries like India. In the case of China, the investment rate is already very high, and the savings rate is even higher. So the challenge for China would be to stimulate consumption. So countries do face different challenges. And also the concept of inclusive growth, which is becoming increasingly popular, is a concept that the benefits of growth should be shared by many people, not simply by the rich, by the poor and by the low-income people and by the middle class. Okay? This is very important because social security system and various other arrangements that support the rising middle class, low-income people, and the poor, that would be very important to support consumption in these economies. And green growth is also important because this is a new source of growth and investment. And green growth does not rely on export dependence, in particular dependence on American and European markets. So inclusive growth and green growth, they can address, these two can address social issues in Asia and environmental issues in Asia, and at the same time can contribute to rebalancing the patterns of growth and sources of growth. And finally, I would like to mention the importance of regional trade integration. The ASEAN plus 3 or ASEAN plus 6 FTA in the region is going to be much better than simply ASEAN plus 1 FTA, like ASEAN plus Korea FTA, but ASEAN plus 3 or ASEAN plus 6, including Japan, China, Korea, or expanding into India, Australia, and New Zealand. By creating a big market in Asia, Asia can become a region of big production and big consumption. So by creating a bigger market, Asia does not have to rely so much on external markets. But that doesn't mean that TPP, or in the case of Korea, the Korea-US FTA is not important. It's equally important because because TPP and also an FTA with the United States is an attempt to create a high-level trade arrangement. And that forces many Asian countries to further open up, which is extremely good. And actually, by opening up, Asian economies can be even more tightly connected.